Welcome to this explainer on hacking, the art of exploitation by John Erickson. Now, to really grasp this topic, I want you to picture something for a second. Imagine a heavy rainstorm at night in a futuristic cyberpunk city. You start with a close-up, just looking at these vibrant neon signs reflecting in a puddle on the dark street. Then you slowly look up, zooming out to reveal this massive, towering metropolis of skyscrapers with flying vehicles darting between them. It's hyper-realistic, moody, and deeply complex. Well, our modern digital landscape is exactly like that sprawling city. It's multi-layered, it's intricate, and it's full of hidden alleys. And today, we're going to completely reframe the narrative around the people who navigate the invisible structures of that digital city better than anyone else: hackers.
Okay, before we even look at a single line of code, let's play with a seemingly simple math puzzle. It perfectly captures the underlying philosophy we're talking about today. You've got four numbers: 1, 3, 4, and 6. You have to use each number exactly once, no more, no less. You can use basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Your goal? Get exactly 24. Now, the rules are incredibly strict and well-defined, right? Yet, I guarantee the answer eludes most people on the first try. You see, most of us get totally stuck in conventional thinking. We try to add or multiply the bigger numbers right out of the gate. But a true hacked solution? It follows the exact rules of the system, but it uses them in highly counterintuitive ways. Think about it. If you subtract 3/4 from 1, you get 1/4. Divide 6 by 1/4, and boom, you get 24. It is 100% within the rules, but it requires a massive perspective shift. And honestly, that is the exact essence of hacking. So, here is our roadmap for the day. We'll be hitting 1, the true hacker mindset; 2, the canvas of programming; 3, the art of exploitation; 4, shellcode and remote access; 5, the security arms race; and wrapping up with 6, information is not a crime. Let's dive right in. Kicking things off with Section 1, the true hacker mindset. We really need to clear up some major misconceptions right off the bat. Erickson traces hacker roots all the way back to the 1950s MIT Model Railroad Club. Yeah, model trains. Early hackers absolutely weren't criminals lurking in dark rooms. They were just tech enthusiasts obsessed with this concept of elegance. They literally took donated telephone equipment and pushed its limits just to see what was possible. When they eventually moved to early computers that used physical punch cards, they didn't just want a program to work. They wanted it to solve a problem beautifully, using the absolute bare minimum number of cards. For them, it was about elevating programming from a simple engineering task into a genuine art form. So we have to draw a hard line here, because this distinction is absolutely crucial. A true hacker is fundamentally driven by the pursuit of knowledge. They have this burning desire to understand complex systems, and they truly appreciate elegant logic. A cracker, on the other hand, is the original term coined for someone who maliciously breaks the law. Crackers usually rely on other people's tools just to make a quick buck or cause damage, often without really even understanding what the tools are doing under the hood. Which brings us to Section 2, the canvas of programming. To actually understand how exploitation works, we first have to understand the literal canvas that hackers are painting on. And that canvas is made of the incredibly strict, literal rules of computer programming. You have to remember, computers do not speak English. To instruct them, we rely on a long chain of translation. A programmer writes in a high-level, readable language, like C, but then a compiler translates that code down into a lower-level assembly language, and then finally down into machine language. This is just raw bits and bytes, the arcane instructions that the CPU actually understands and executes. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. Your average programmer, they usually stop at the source code. They figure, hey, if the C code looks correct, we're totally fine. Hackers do not stop there. They dig deeper. They examine the compiled binary itself. They are looking directly at the actual machine code where the real execution takes place. By understanding how the CPU truly operates at its most fundamental, granular level, a hacker learns how to manipulate the very programs running on it. All right, let's get into Section 3, the art of exploitation. This is where we see how hackers manipulate those rigid rules to completely bypass a program's own security. Erickson uses this fantastic analogy of a guy finding a magic lamp. He rubs it, a genie pops out, and the guy wishes for $1 billion. The genie snaps his fingers and literally drops a briefcase full of money right out of thin air, crushing whatever is underneath it.
Well, computers are exactly like that literal genie. They have literally zero common sense. They just rigidly follow instructions to the absolute letter, even if the outcome is completely illogical or harmful to the system itself. And that literalism, that is exactly what opens the door for exploitation. So, by finding little flaws in this rigid logic, edge cases that the original programmer simply didn't anticipate, hackers employ techniques like memory corruption. A classic example is a buffer overflow. Imagine a program trying to store a huge amount of data in a tiny temporary memory space that wasn't built to hold it. What happens? The excess data literally spills over, or overflows, into the adjacent memory space. A clever hacker can actually use this overflow to rewrite the program's instructions while it is running. It's wild, but it allows them to achieve what's called the execution of arbitrary code. Moving right along to Section 4, Shellcode and Remote Access. Okay, so a hacker successfully tricks a program and redirects its execution flow. Now what? Well, they need to deliver a specific payload to actually take control. Enter shellcode. This is a carefully crafted string of raw bytes that gets secretly smuggled right into the computer's memory, completely bypassing normal operations. And it's called shellcode for a reason. Its most common purpose is to spawn a root shell, which is basically a command line interface that hands the user absolute, totally unrestrained control over the entire system. Now, hackers can deploy this shellcode locally, assuming they already have some limited access to a machine. But the real game changer is doing it remotely over a network. They do this by targeting what are called system daemons. A daemon is just a program that runs tirelessly in the background, constantly waiting for network connections. And fun fact, the term was actually inspired by Maxwell's daemon, a famous thought experiment in physics. Anyway, if a background web server or an email daemon has a tiny flaw, a remote attacker can inject their shellcode and literally take over that machine from halfway across the planet. Let's look at the push and pull in Section 5, the security arms race. You have to remember, for every single attack out there, there is a defense. It's a relentless, nonstop game of cat and mouse. Or, as the book beautifully illustrates, frogs and snakes. Think about the golden poison dart frog. It secretes enough toxin to kill 10 adult humans. Why? Because a specific species of snake kept eating them and developing a resistance. So to survive, the frogs evolved deadlier poisons. That exact same coevolution happens in computer security. Attacking hackers develop a brilliant new exploit. Defending professionals patch it and invent new security systems. And then attackers find a way to bypass those new systems. It never ends. And this brilliantly shows how the defense fights back on two totally distinct fronts. On one side, you've got detecting countermeasures. This is where system administrators actively hunt for tracks. They're reading logs and sniffing network traffic to catch attackers red-handed. On the flip side, you have hardening countermeasures. This is where programmers try to just block the attacks outright. They do things like randomizing where memory is located, or making specific areas of memory entirely non-executable. That way, even if an attacker manages to inject their shellcode, the computer flat out refuses to run it. And finally, we hit Section 6. Information is not a crime. So how does all of this build into the complex intersection of ethics, hacking, and the legal system? Well, the source notes some pretty intense historical tensions between lawmakers and technologists. There have been several instances where legislation heavily impacted technology. For example, back in 1997, the U.S. limited software export encryption keys to just 40 bits, which was incredibly easy to crack. Then, in 1998, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, was passed. By 2001, things really escalated. The DMCA was used to threaten researchers at Princeton for publishing security weaknesses. And we even saw the high-profile arrest of a Russian programmer, Dmitry Sklyarov, just for presenting his findings on software vulnerabilities at a convention. But the text argues a really profound philosophical point here. It argues that knowledge itself is completely neutral. Think about the science of nuclear physics. It can be used to build a devastating weapon, or it can be used to generate clean power for millions. The knowledge of how to break a computer system is exactly the same. It is inherently neutral. Morality lies entirely in how that knowledge is applied. The argument is that restricting exploration and criminalizing the mere discovery of flaws doesn't make us safer. It just leaves very dangerous vulnerabilities hidden in the software that our entire society relies on. And that brings us to this incredibly powerful sentiment from the author. Information itself isn't a crime. True hackers, the ones driven by sheer curiosity to find unintended uses of a system, are absolutely essential.
By poking at the edges and exposing these hidden flaws, they essentially force companies to fix their vulnerable software. They do this before the truly malicious actors, the crackers, can leverage those exact same hidden flaws to cause massive, real-world damage.
As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We live in that interconnected, wildly complex digital city we imagined at the very beginning. In a landscape built entirely on rigid code, are we genuinely safer pretending our systems are perfect? Or should we empower the curious minds, the true hackers, to expose the flaws so we can build a stronger, more resilient future for everyone? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me today.